"Remove your shirt, young lady. This is a family community." I froze mid-step. Elora froze too, right under the arched iron sign that reads, Marlowe Glen. A return to tradition. The woman who just spoken stood with arms crossed like a disciplinary nun from a bad memory, squinting through designer lenses. "Now," she added, gesturing at my daughter's chest like she'd spotted contraband. That woman was Silene Vrock, president of our HOA board, keeper of bylaws, self-appointed guardian of suburban purity. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Silene's weapon was policy, not volume. And the moment she saw the black ink digits above Elora's sternum, 126D, framed in a soft phoenix bloom, something shifted. Her smugness faltered. She blinked once, then again. That tattoo wasn't decorative. It was a number the hospital assigned when they said my daughter had 3 weeks to live unless they found a bone marrow match. Silene didn't know what she'd just seen. But I did. I stepped into view. That policy you're about to quote, it didn't exist yesterday, and if you're planning to write her up for visible body markings, you better timestamp it real time. I preserve chain of custody metadata for a living. Her face twitched. She tried to recover. This community maintains standards of presentation. That includes dress and visible ink among minors. Show me where it says that. I didn't raise my voice either, just watched her. This isn't a story about a tattoo. It's about power. How far some people go to control others under the mask of order. If you've ever dealt with a homeowners association that thinks it owns your life, subscribe now, because what they did next gets darker. I'm Gareth Truwell. I don't yell. I analyze. For 20 years, I've been a forensic document examiner, called into courtrooms to dismantle fake wills, tampered contracts, and signature fraud. What I lack in social charm, I make up for in provable truth. I also buried my wife, Michaela, 4 years ago this week. She carved the ashwood bench that sits under the Marlowe Glen welcome sign with her own hands during chemo. She carved it for Elora. There's a brass plaque on it now that reads, "Her fight is written in her blood." That tattoo Silene tried to erase with a policy, it's the same number Elora mouthed in her sleep over and over, while her marrow rebuilt itself drip by drip. It's also the same tattoo that helped her walk again. Every time she doubted she'd live long enough to go to prom or graduate high school, she looked down at her chest and traced that number, her donor code, 126D. So when Silene told her to cover it under threat of community violation, what she really said was, "Your survival offends my sense of order." And here's the thing, the HOA never had a visible tattoo policy, not until this morning. I'd already requested a copy of the bylaws last week after a neighbor warned me. They were adding youth visual rules to the enforcement list. Nothing had passed. Nothing had even been drafted, which means Silene saw my daughter's skin, panicked, and tried to retroactively rewrite the rules while we were still standing there. I didn't need to argue. I just walked Elora back home and opened my laptop. If they were going to attack my daughter for surviving, they'd better prepare their files. I was about to dissect every digital trail they left behind, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because unlike their newsletters and neighborhood gossip, evidence has memory, and I read it like other people read novels. So I opened the PDF they uploaded to the Marlowe Glen Decorum Archive that morning. I pulled its creation timestamp, and when I saw that it was generated 12 minutes after Silene saw Elora's chest, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something colder, sharper. They didn't just cross a line. They backdated the pen they used to draw it, and I was going to make sure they bled for it. The first violation arrived before sunset. Obstruction of uniform sightlines, unauthorized bench placement, a printed notice, laminated and zip-tied to the ashwood bench Michaela carved with trembling fingers between chemo infusions. The brass plaque had been polished last week by Elora herself. Now it had a red sticker slapped right over the word blood. I didn't touch it. I didn't even rip it down. I just stood there and read every line until the sun disappeared behind the hedges. By morning, we had 3 more notices. Improper mailbox coloration, grass encroachment of paved boundary, unregistered fauna structures. That last one was about a ceramic bluebird Elora made in art therapy. It sits under the willow tree where she used to nap during recovery. They were coming hard and fast. No warnings, no friendly reminders, not even the pretense of fairness. Just straight citations, like we were squatters defiling a museum exhibit. They didn't need justification, Not when HOA policy lets them define decorum however they want under Clause 2.3. Aesthetic harmonization. I knew their game: flood the resident with technical violations, bury the emotional core beneath bureaucracy, force us to respond to weeds and paint while ignoring what really mattered: the moment Silene tried to erase my daughter in front of the entire community. But this wasn't my first battlefield. I archived every notice, scanned them, logged timestamps, geolocated where they were placed, pulled camera feeds from my front stoop, my neighbor's doorbell, the intersection pole behind the welcome sign. I kept copies off-site, uploaded evidence in real time. You don't fight someone like Silene with anger, you fight her with provenance. I started comparing notice templates, font changes, margins, signature blocks. The ones we'd received used a different footer alignment than those issued to my neighbor, Mr. Lenz. Just 3 days prior, not a single violation we'd been given appeared in the HOA's monthly bulletin, which by charter they were required to log by end-of-day Friday. And that's when it clicked. They were issuing violations that didn't technically exist yet, just like the tattoo policy. Silene wasn't just abusing authority, she was falsifying timing, rolling out enforcement without documentation, then backdating the paperwork to make it look procedural. It wasn't just unethical, it was structurally illegal under the HOA's own enforcement guidelines. I needed a second pair of eyes, so I emailed a friend, Nodia Ferros, a civic compliance attorney I'd worked with on a signature fraud case 3 years ago. "Attach the PDFs," she called back 30 minutes later. "This isn't normal," she said. "They're not logging these violations on the shared ledger." "Nope. You sure you want to poke this hornet's nest, Gareth?" "I'm not poking it. I'm documenting the queen." Alora stayed quiet through most of it. She still hadn't said a word about Silene's command. Not at the dinner table, not when we walked past the stickered bench, not even when we found the bluebird in a trash bag behind the mailbox post. But that night, when I came out of the office, she was standing barefoot in the yard, hands clasped behind her back, staring up at the willow tree. "She looked at me like I was dirt," she said. "She doesn't matter," I replied. "She does if she gets to decide who belongs here." My throat went dry. Elora wasn't a child anymore. She'd spent a year on IV drips, fighting back from marrow collapse. Another year learning how to walk without collapsing. And somehow, through it all, she'd learned how to speak with more grace than most adults I knew. But this wasn't about grace anymore. I told her what I'd found, that the notices weren't real, not yet, that Silene was rewriting the rules by the hour. Her answer was quiet. "Then stop her." I nodded, and that's when I knew this wasn't going to be a quiet audit. This was war. The next morning, I showed up at the monthly board meeting with a printed copy of the violation ledger, as it had appeared 1 week ago. I highlighted every mismatch, left one line blank. Under that line, I wrote, "See you in the logs." Then I slid it across the table. Ronan Sile, the HOA's archival clerk, was sitting 2 seats down. His hand froze above his notepad, and for just a second, he looked up at me with something like guilt or fear, or both. I had him. Ronan Sile avoided eye contact for most of the meeting. He kept his pen moving even when no one was speaking. When Silene rattled off her scripted announcements, mailbox uniformity standard update, community fence repainting initiative, urgent decorum enforcement campaign. He nodded at nothing, writing without rhythm, pretending the words didn't sting. But I was watching him. Not just his face, his wrists, his posture. The tiny twitch in his jaw when Silene said the word visible ink. Most people didn't remember me from my guest lectures. Ronan did. I'd spoken at his criminal justice program 6 years ago. Just one substitute lecture, but enough to leave an impression. He'd stayed after class, asked me about evidence trail gaps in municipal fraud cases, told me he wanted to work in policy enforcement, not policing. He said enforcement was cleaner. Today, his eyes said otherwise. I let him sit in silence while the rest of the board reviewed last month's financial summary and approved Celine's new civic decorum clause as a draft proposal. No discussion, no questions. Just stamped and logged. A policy that didn't exist 72 hours ago, now retroactively acknowledged as if it had always been there. Silene, in her pale pink blazer and linen slacks, looked untouchable. She didn't so much as glance in my direction until the end, when she opened the floor for community concerns. Mr. Truell, she said, and even her voice smiled. I understand you've submitted some discrepancies? I stood slowly, not dramatic, just precise. I have. And you believe these notices were issued incorrectly? I believe they were issued outside of procedural protocol, I said. Specifically without proper timestamp logging on the HOA server, in direct violation of Section 5.4c of your own digital governance charter. The room shifted. A few heads turned. Silene kept smiling. Well, if there's a misunderstanding, I'm sure our documentation team will clarify. Ronan, do you have the master log report? Ronan's hand stopped moving. He looked at her, then back down. I'll need to verify the timestamp versions. Ronan, she said again, softer this time, you do have the logs, yes? He glanced toward me. I gave him nothing. Not a nod, not a signal. Just held his gaze. I'll send them to the board after internal cross-check, he said. Silene's mouth tightened, just for a second. Then she nodded and moved on. After the meeting, I waited outside the clubhouse, watched the others peel away in golf carts and hybrids, quiet handshakes and plastic smiles. Ronan was the last to leave. His backpack looked too heavy for someone who sat all day. He spotted me instantly. Froze. I walked toward him, calm, measured, no theatrics. You didn't back her, I said. He adjusted his glasses. I didn't back you either. I don't need backing. I need access. His eyes flicked toward the HOA office window. There are protocols. I know, and she broke every one of them. He said nothing. You know the decorum clause was fabricated after the incident. Silence. You know she edited the community violation timestamps manually. Still nothing. Then he sighed, barely audible. You think you're the first one to get buried under her fake violations? No, I think I'm the first one with the skills to prove it. He looked tired, not just physically, something heavier, the weight of seeing rot and calling it structure. I used to believe in this, he muttered. That order kept people safe. And now, his voice cracked. Now I just hope I don't drown in it. He started to walk past me, but I stepped sideways, blocking the path. Alora's tattoo is her transplant code, I said. That's why she inked it, so she'd never forget that she made it. Ronan stopped. I'm not asking you to take sides, I said. Just don't bury the truth. He hesitated. Then he reached into his backpack, pulled out a thumb drive in a zip pouch, and slid it into my hand without looking. Folder's named Watchtower, he said. You'll understand when you open it. Then he walked away. I didn't call after him. Didn't need to. I already knew what the name meant. In Marlowe Glenn's policy handbook, Watchtower was the internal project name for the HOA's digital enforcement log, supposed to be tamper-proof, immutable, a chain of trust ledger tied to every violation issued. If Silene had altered it, if Ronan had copies of the pre-edit logs, that meant I wasn't just fighting bad policy, I was holding a smoking gun. 2 more violations arrived the next day. This time, they didn't even bother with subtlety. Legacy item, non-conforming materials, community entryway furniture, unapproved memorialization, personal plaques in shared spaces. They wanted the bench gone, the one Michaela carved during her 3rd month of chemo, hands shaking too much to finish the left side scroll work, so I helped with the last curve, the one Alora sat on every time she came home from outpatient transfusions. The one with the words, "Her fight is written in her blood," burned into a brass plate beneath her transplant number. They wanted to erase it, officially now. When I picked up the violation slip, I noticed the seal had been reprinted. A newer HOA logo, different from the one used on last month's forms. The shield had a fresh border, slightly shifted serif font, and a registered trademark symbol that didn't exist when the original logo was approved. They were laundering the presentation, polishing the propaganda to match the new decorum era. I didn't touch the bench. I didn't remove the plaque. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I walked down to the trail behind the tennis courts where Mrs. Givens, our neighbor 2 doors down, was walking her terrier, Baxter. You got a second? I asked, falling in step. She eyed me cautiously. If it's about the board, I keep out of it. They tagged your shed for paint mismatch last spring, didn't they? She stopped. I painted it the exact color from their sample book. And they still find you, she nodded slowly. They ever log that violation in the newsletter? Summary? Her eyes narrowed. No, they told me it was a warning. You pay the fine? Yeah, 200. I didn't say anything else. Just let her think about that as I kept walking. Down by the corner lot, I found Mr. Lenz watering his flower beds. Same man who got cited for scent variants from his imported jasmine vines. 1 week later, he removed them. He still says he doesn't know which neighbor filed the complaint. I asked him the same question. Was it logged publicly? Nope. Said it was a discretion matter. Same story. Over and over. Warnings that weren't warnings. Fines that weren't documented. Infractions that had no trace in the monthly bulletins or enforcement roll-ups. And the moment I brought up Silene's name, every conversation slowed, like the wind dropped, like they weren't sure if it was safe to say what they really thought. That's how fear works. It doesn't scream. It suffocates. I returned home and unlocked the Watchtower folder on the drive Ronan gave me. Inside were over 200 files, violation reports, board minutes, original charter drafts, and most importantly, a full snapshot of the digital violation ledger as it existed 1 month ago. It was clean, cleaner than it should have been. I cross-referenced known citations from neighbors, Given's shed, Lenz's jasmine, the Moreno's fence repair, and none of them existed in the ledger, which meant the violations were being tracked somewhere else, off-ledger, illegally. And then I found it. Tucked in a subfolder labeled Mirror Log Dev. An Excel file. Simple, unlabeled rows, resident names, dates, description codes, penalty types. No formal structure, no timestamp lockout, no ledger hash. It wasn't even encrypted. It was a shadow log. And our name was in it, 7 times in 2 days. That's when it hit me. The official log was a facade, for optics, for charter compliance, but the real tracking, the real punishment, was all being handled off-record, where Silene and her board could assign, erase, edit, or escalate at will. I scrolled to the bottom of the file. Newest entry, True L, G. Plaque order removal, recommended. Permanent marking breach, not bench, not decor violation, marking. They weren't citing me for the structure, they were citing the memory, Elora's plaque, her story, her survival. That's what they were trying to erase. Not because it violated policy, but because it disrupted their narrative of uniformity, of clean lines and quiet residence, of no scars, no reminders, no signs that someone had bled and clawed their way back to life in full view of the welcome sign. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the words on the screen. They were planning to strip that plaque. They just didn't know I already had the entire plan in my hands. The last thing I expected to find was a scroll bar. When I opened the metadata pane for the new decorum policy, PDF, decorum, youth addendum, V2's PDF. I wasn't just scanning timestamps anymore. I was deep in the XML guts of the document, looking at edit trails, modification objects, invisible field overlays, the kind of things no one sees unless they know what to look for. And there it was, an edit object with a timestamp, 12 minutes after the confrontation with Elora. Worse, inside the object, a copy-pasted clause from a previous unrelated document. The so-called youth visual decorum language was lifted from a seasonal pool attire memo written last year. Sloppy, too fast. Someone needed to slap together something that looked authoritative after Silene had already made the threat. I exported the full audit trail, marked the key timestamp, then checked the creation ID. It was assigned from a personal Adobe license, not the HOA's official document handler. Silene had authored it on her personal machine. I cross-checked the license hash with the original pool memo. Same hash. She hadn't even changed the metadata. She doctored a violation policy targeting my daughter using a recycled memo and tried to pass it off as board-ratified law. And she did it after the incident, not before. That was forgery, not sloppiness, not overreach. Forgery. My hands weren't shaking, but I could feel the pressure rising in my chest, controlled, focused, a surge of clarity. I pulled up the HOA charter, searched for the enforcement approval chain. There it was, Clause 6.1d. All addenda to the decorum standards must be reviewed, approved, and time-stamped by a minimum of 3 board members before being entered into force. Only Silene had signed this one, and the date, auto-filled by the authoring software, not even manually entered, no board minutes, no approval log, no record. I dropped the full structure into my forensic audit suite, labeled the markers, linked the timestamps, annotated the reuse of previous language, highlighted every procedural break. Then I ran the audit signature, a SHA-25 digital hash, sealed and stored with redundancy across my cloud sync. I wasn't just logging inconsistencies, I was building an evidentiary tree. And once it was done, I started drafting my declaration. Certified review, decorum addendum file, audit, author Gareth Truell. Credentials: federal expert witness, forensic document authentication, 17 trials, 2 state reviews. Purpose: to determine the origin, timestamp integrity, and procedural validity of HOA policy file decorum. Youth addendum v2.pdf. That was the heading. Below that, I laid it all out, clearly, coldly, without venom, just the facts. Timestamp differentials, license mismatches, charter violations, data overlay traces, every line a nail. By midnight, the report was sealed, signed, and archived in 3 locations. One on a drive hidden in a hollow book. One encrypted in my daughter's school account cloud. One on a peer-reviewed evidence chain database used for civil documentation disputes. The last backup was more symbolic than necessary, but symbols mattered, especially when people tried to erase them. I sat back, closed the monitor, and looked at the picture on my wall, Michaela holding Elora's IV pole with one hand, carving into the bench wood with the other. There was sawdust on her hospital gown. She died a month after finishing it. Elora never cried when we bolted the plaque in place. She just sat there, hands folded, staring. That plaque was her name before she had strength to speak it out loud. That tattoo was her voice before her lungs could hold a full sentence. And now, the same woman who wanted her to cover her chest was trying to rip both from the record. I stood and walked outside. The bench still stood, just barely visible under the white HOA sticker wrapped around the brass plate. It read, "Pending removal, decorum conflict." But now, I had more than a timestamp. I had a map of every lie Silene told to get that sticker printed, and I was going to bury her with it. The email hit my inbox at 7:04 a.m. Subject line: immediate action required, violation escalation notice. Body: due to ongoing non-compliance and your refusal to remove the non-conforming bench structure and plaque, the Marlowe Glen Board has voted to proceed with third-party removal services. You have 48 hours to comply voluntarily before costs are imposed. No signature, no board vote record. Just the HOA logo and a generic return address. They were moving faster now, not bluffing, committing. They were betting I'd fold under pressure or run out of time. But they weren't watching closely enough. I'd already spent the last 72 hours doing what I do best, preserving every step of their fraud. I clicked open the audit log again, cross-referenced the removal order timestamp against the previous digital violation records from the shadow log Ronan had given me. The entries had doubled. Escalate for non-compliance. Record lack of cooperation. Recommend removal with grounds of safety risk. Safety risk? The bench hadn't moved in 4 years. It was more structurally sound than half the sidewalks in the development. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the language they were prepping for the newsletter, for the community Facebook page, for the homeowners group chat. They weren't just deleting the bench, they were rewriting the story of why it needed to go. That's when I knew this wasn't just policy fraud. It was narrative control. They couldn't let Elora's story stand, because a scar that survives out loud makes every silent rule look weak. A girl with a tattoo that marks a victory, that breaks the spell of shame they've built their power on. So they had to turn her into a problem. They'd already started. I saw it when I dropped Elora off at school that morning. A woman at the crosswalk, a resident I vaguely knew from the spring planting event, tilted her head and said, "She okay? Heard there was a dress? Code situation." The tone wasn't curiosity. It was judgment. I didn't answer, just walked her in, hugged her, and made sure the scarf she'd wrapped around her chest wasn't too tight. She said it was fine, but I saw how her shoulders curved inward. She wasn't hiding the tattoo. She was bracing herself against what it now meant to wear it outside our home. That was the moment. That was when I stopped being angry and started being cold. Because now they weren't just trying to humiliate her, they were rebranding her. I drove straight to the county clerk's office, requested the HOA's articles of incorporation, pulled their nonprofit status application, their enforcement charter, and every amendment filed in the past 5 years. Cross-checked the digital timestamp audit I'd run against the filing history in the public record. Just as I suspected, none of the new youth decorum policies had ever been filed. They hadn't gone through public notice, hadn't passed official board procedure, and hadn't been entered into the HOA's formal registry. The clause Silene used to threaten Alora didn't just violate HOA policy. It didn't legally exist. I scanned everything, certified it through the clerk's timestamp system, and uploaded it into the evidence chain I'd been building. Every document linked, every inconsistency labeled. I wasn't documenting violations anymore. I was preparing a case. That night, Elora found me in the office. She didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands, watching the scan bar crawl across the screen. Finally, she asked, "Are they really going to take it?" "The bench," I said, not without stepping over me first. She walked in slowly and sat on the edge of the desk. "They think the tattoo makes people uncomfortable." "They're right," I said. "It does." She looked confused. "It reminds them what survival looks like. People like Silene can't handle that kind of noise." Elora pulled one sleeve back and looked down at her arm, where the donor number continued around in a delicate band. I didn't even know she'd extended the tattoo. "They think they're protecting the community," she said quietly. "No, they're protecting their illusion of what the community's supposed to look like." She didn't respond, just leaned her head against my shoulder. I let the silence sit, and I knew right then we weren't backing down. They could rip the bench out with a crane if they wanted, but I was going to make sure that when they did, the entire neighborhood knew why. Ronan didn't meet me at the park bench like we'd agreed. He was already there when I arrived, hood up, sleeves rolled, earbuds dangling loose but not playing anything. The kind of posture that said, I shouldn't be doing this, but his eyes told a different story. He was ready. "You read the drive?" he asked without preamble. "All of it." He looked away, toward the pond beyond the tennis courts. "Then you know it's worse than just your daughter." "I know." The folder labeled Watchtower had only been the beginning. What Ronan handed me next was something deeper. His personal archive, backed up server versions, Slack transcripts from the HOA's internal chat, raw violation logs with digital fingerprints showing exactly who had edited them. Silene's username appeared 143 times, not in normal procedural entries, not in votes, but in modifications, removing timestamps, altering fine amounts, reassigning violation targets to other residents when original names didn't align with her narrative. "She's been erasing audit trails," Ronan said. "Not just yours, families who questioned her, residents who refused new guidelines." I opened the newest file he passed me, a folder marked Suppressions. Inside, PDFs of warning letters never mailed, screenshots of complaint emails that were archived but never responded to, and images of handwritten notes, some from residents, some that looked like they were from Silene herself. One note caught my eye. "Keep the Truel girl out of the pool zone this summer. Distracting, dangerous precedent." The date was 2 weeks before the confrontation. Ronan spoke again, quieter now. She called it visual liability, said visible scars and tattoos sent the wrong message to younger children. My throat burned, not from surprise, from the sheer precision of her cruelty. "She's using the HOA as a censorship machine," I said. Ronan nodded. "You're not the only one who noticed, but you're the first with credentials who can prove it." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't just scared, he was ashamed. "She's gonna burn me for this," he muttered. "Strip my position, blacklist me from policy roles." "She might try," I said, "but not before we flip the story." Ronan reached into his bag and handed me a sheet, not digital, printed, which meant he was already burning the trail behind him. "Draft version of the next newsletter," he said. "It's not public yet." I scanned it. "Restoring order, board to remove damaged community fixture after safety concerns." They were calling the bench damaged, calling the plaque vandalism, calling my daughter's survival controversial. She wasn't just trying to erase Elora anymore. She was trying to redefine her as a risk. "They'll drop this Thursday morning," Ronan said. "It'll be on every doorstep by sunrise." That gave us 48 hours. I can intercept it, I said. Not physically, narratively. Ronan tilted his head. Before she controls the story, I show the community the data, the doctored logs, the false policies, the metadata trail, the PDF audit, all of it. He paused. That's your play? It's the only play, truth, but wrapped in what they fear most, which is a story they don't control. He gave a dry, bitter laugh. You've got until Thursday then. We parted ways without ceremony. No handshake, no promises. Just a weight between us now. An unspoken agreement that the next time we stood face to face, the line would be drawn behind us. Back at home, I showed Alora the draft newsletter. She read it silently. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. I thought they'd just keep going after you, she said. Not me. You're what they fear, I told her. A reminder they can't silence. She nodded once. Not in agreement. In understanding. Then she stood, walked to the shelf, and pulled down a photo frame we hadn't touched in years. It was Michaela, sitting on the bench in its first week, hair half gone, smile still full. Use this, Elora said. If you're going to tell the story, tell all of it. That night, I stayed up past 2 a.m., stitching together every shred of truth into a single presentation, a timeline, a forensic breakdown, and the story of a girl they tried to bury in silence, now carved into brass, ink, and digital permanence. It was almost time to open the floodgates. The house was dark except for the screen glow bouncing off the walls. My desk looked like an evidence locker. 3 monitors, a notebook filled with case numbers, printed versions of the violation reports, and Ronan's flash drive angled just enough to catch the light. Every line of code I wrote that night wasn't just for clarity, it was for protection. The plan was simple on the surface. Build a digital brief that couldn't be dismissed as opinion. Not a rant, not an angry parent's tirade, but a professional-grade forensic expose. Something airtight, something admissible, something viral. I started with the PDF audit, overlaying the metadata view of the decorum file beside the original pool memo Silene had cannibalized. In real time, viewers would see how the same exact clause existed in both. I boxed the duplication in red. Above it, I added the caption, same wording, same license, different agenda. Then I layered the SHA-256 hash fingerprint of the file beneath the audit trail, labeled with a timestamp, showing it was created after the confrontation with Elora, not before. Next, I queued up the shadow violation logs, the Excel sheet Silene had no idea Ronan preserved. I highlighted entries for true L, G, noting inconsistencies between what appeared on paper versus what had been officially logged. Some entries simply said, "see verbal record," a phrase that had no legal standing in an HOA governed by written charter. I placed that beside the formal ledger, untouched and pristine. 2 realities, one real, one fabricated. Then came the emails, silent, soft-spoken digital proof that Silene was not just orchestrating a cover-up, but maintaining a campaign of false citations and tactical humiliation. One in particular stood out, target Truel family with visible enforcement presence this week. We need precedent set before July newsletter drop. Dated 4 days before the fake decorum clause was published. I converted it into a slide and burned in the metadata pane, so no one could say it was photoshopped. But the final slide, that was for Elora. I scanned the brass plaque from the bench, the one they wanted to remove in the name of safety, and layered it over a photo of Michaela holding Elora in that first summer after her transplant. Both of them sitting on that very bench, Michaela's hospital bracelet still on her wrist, Elora asleep against her shoulder, her scar peeking out from under a cartoon t-shirt. Then I laid this line in bold beneath the image. This is what they called a decorum violation. I took a breath, then another, and hit save. The next step was distribution. Quietly at first. I wasn't going to broadcast it yet. I started by sending the full packet to the HOA's legal oversight email, blind copied to the county compliance department, and tagged a digital forensic oversight group I'd worked with years ago on a zoning falsification case. 3 verifiable sources that would trigger automated receipt chains. From there, I queued up the community upload. Marlowe Glen had an internal portal for residents. A sterile dashboard no one paid attention to unless a dues invoice showed up. But tucked in its resident resources section was a subsection for independent submissions, mostly used for bake sale flyers and garage sales. That's where I uploaded the link to the audit file. No title, no rant, just a short line of text. Clarification on recent violation activity. Source, Certified Document Examiner. I time-stamped the upload and took 3 screenshots. It was live. By morning, every board member would see it. But I wasn't done. I burned 3 DVD copies, labeled them in black ink, dropped them one by one in the mailboxes of residents who'd told me their stories. Mrs. Givens, Mr. Lenz, the Morenos. People Silene had silenced. Each disc came with a note. Watch this before Thursday. As I sealed the last envelope, Elora walked in, sleepy-eyed and hoodie-draped, barefoot on the kitchen tile. "You're really doing it?" she asked. I nodded. "They wanted you to feel small." She smiled faintly. "They messed with the wrong family." I laughed, low and tight. "They messed with the wrong evidence chain." She held up her phone. "Want me to post it to the school group chat?" "Not yet," I said. "Let it land where it hurts first." The bench still stood outside, and by the time they touched it, half the neighborhood would know what it meant, and what Silene had done to make it disappear. The storm didn't come all at once. It started with a silence. By noon, the resident resources section on the HOA portal had been locked. The submission page redirected to a 403 error. Someone had tried to take the file down. Too late. The audit link had already spread. At least a dozen neighbors had downloaded it. I knew because one of them, Mrs. Givens, slipped a handwritten thank you note under my door. She called it the first honest thing this community's seen in 5 years. The DVD copies worked faster than I expected. By the end of the day, I got 3 texts from unknown numbers, all short. "We're with you. Read everything. Let us know what you need." Finally, someone put it in writing. They weren't just watching. They were waking up. But the real shift came when Ronan texted me just past midnight. "Silene is scrambling. She's trying to call a private emergency session tomorrow night. No residents allowed." I texted back. "Illegal under charter. Emergency sessions require quorum and 72 HR public posting." His reply, "She knows, doesn't care, wants to pull the bench before the newsletter drop." It was happening. She was accelerating everything, trying to finish the purge before her power cracked. The document had her cornered, but she wasn't the type to go quietly. She'd built her legacy here on manufactured order. If that fell, so did her grip. I needed to be ahead of her, again. So I spent the morning canvassing, not knocking on doors, strategic visits. I started with Mr. Lenz, who answered the door in his gardening gloves, dirt under his nails. "I saw the file," he said. "Didn't think anyone would ever document it. You willing to say that publicly?" He hesitated, then nodded once. Same pattern at the Morenos. They had 2 violation notices on their door the day after attending Elora's transplant fundraiser last year. They never connected it. Now they did. Each conversation followed a rhythm: confusion, anger, then alignment. The evidence gave people permission to admit what they already knew, but had been afraid to name. Silene wasn't just strict, she was strategic, punishing in silence, isolating rule breakers until they folded or fled. And now, we had enough voices to prove it. By late afternoon, I had 6 statements, 2 video testimonials, and a rough roster of residents willing to attend the next board meeting if it went public. Elora spent the day helping, not with words, but presence. She followed me from house to house, her tattoo visible. No scarf, no hoodie. She didn't explain it to anyone. She didn't have to. Her body did the talking, and people listened. The final piece fell into place when Ronan messaged again. "I can't stop the removal order, but I can delay the contractor." I called him. "How?" "I schedule the work orders. If I mark it as underground hazard present, they have to wait for a utility clearance. State law." "You sure they won't override you?" "They'd have to file it themselves, and Silene doesn't like getting her hands dirty." I let out a breath. "Do it. It'll buy you 2 days, maybe 3. That was all I needed. I called Nadia next, my legal contact from the audit verification. I walked her through the updated evidence set, the resident statements, and the illegal emergency session Silene was planning. She's exposed now, Nadia said. If she tries to push through removal without quorum or notice, we can move to injunctive relief. I'll draft the letter. Do it fast. I already started. By nightfall, I had everything lined up. Legal shield, community witnesses, a full forensic report that had already started whispering its way through the HOA's curated silence. I stood in front of the bench before going to bed, Elora beside me. The sticker was still there, peeling at the corner. I didn't touch it. You think they'll still come? She asked. They always come when they're desperate. She looked up at me. Then let them. I smiled. It wasn't courage. It was clarity. We weren't waiting anymore. We were ready. The first sign of panic came at 7:41 a.m. A new memo appeared on the HOA portal, plain, rushed, and unsigned. Clarification regarding community standards enforcement. Marlo Glenn, HOA Board, has not authorized any decorum policy changes related to minor appearance. Please disregard any circulating false documents. No mention of Silene, no mention of the audit, just a coward's attempt to reset the clock without admitting it ever ticked. But the signature metadata on the PDF said otherwise. It had been authored on the same admin account that uploaded Decorum, Youth Addendum V2 PDF. Same license ID, same machine hash. I posted the audit again, this time with the new memo superimposed beside the original forgery, with digital fingerprints highlighted in red. A final slide appeared at the bottom. Same author, same machine, same lie. This is not a misunderstanding. This is manipulation. And the community knew it. By 10 a.m., I counted 13 front yards with little signs I didn't put there, handwritten, printed, even chalked on driveways. Let the bench stand. We remember. 1-26D is courage. One neighbor, I still don't know who, hung a strip of ribbon from their mailbox, yellow, then red, then a single black one in the center. I didn't understand the pattern until I saw the caption posted on the next door thread that followed. Yellow for survival, red for blood, black for every time they tried to make us feel ashamed of healing. They'd started building their own symbols now, their own language of resistance. The HOA board meeting wasn't supposed to be public, but word got around. By the time I pulled into the community clubhouse parking lot, it was full. Not just with the usual suspects, the polished, retired board loyalists with clipboards and neat hair, but younger couples, teenagers, even 2 elderly residents who hadn't attended a meeting in 5 years. And Silene was already at the head of the table. Her smile was thinner this time. "Mr. Truell," she said. As I stepped through the door, "This is a closed committee session, not open for grievance presentation." I took my seat anyway. "You're discussing an unsanctioned removal order under a policy not filed with the state. I'm here under Article 4.3.6 of the Charter. Residents may challenge emergency actions affecting communal property." Ronan was seated near the corner, hands folded tightly in his lap. He didn't speak, but when Silene looked to him for backup, he didn't meet her eyes. She pressed forward anyway. "There has been a misunderstanding about the intentions of the board," she began. "Recent misinformation has circulated, documents taken out of context, edits made to working drafts, none of which represent official policy." "Working drafts can't backdate timestamps," I said. She flinched, just slightly. "Mr. Truell." "No?" I stood. "You don't get to talk over this? You want to talk policy? Let's talk policy." I pulled a stack of printed reports from my bag, each page stamped with a hash signature and metadata trail. I handed one to every seated board member, including Ronan. "This is a forensic audit of the so-called Decorum Addendum, authored from your license, Silene. After you confronted my daughter, not before. You lied, then you tried to rewrite the rules so your lie looked legal." She shifted in her seat. "That's your interpretation." "It's not an interpretation. It's proof." Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "I saw that post. The timeline matches." Another added, "They wanted to tear the bench out today." I dropped the final copy onto the table in front of her. "This is a cease and desist from an external compliance attorney. Removal of the bench will result in formal legal action and a community-wide audit. If you push it further, every file you've touched goes under court review." Silene stared down at the papers. No response. That's when Ronan finally spoke. "She modified the logs." Silene snapped her head toward him. He didn't flinch. "I watched her do it," he said, "and I archived everything." No one moved. No one breathed. Then, one by one, the other board members began shifting in their seats. Not toward her. Away. The illusion cracked. And just like that, Silene Vrijk wasn't the center of the table anymore. She was the subject of it. The vote wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. 3 hands raised almost in unison, 2 board members and Ronan. A 4th hesitated, then joined them. Silene sat motionless, her arms folded, lips pressed tight as if her silence could slow the unraveling. I didn't raise my hand. I wasn't part of the board. This wasn't my victory to claim. This was a reckoning of their own design. The motion passed. Suspension of President Silene Vrijk pending independent audit and charter review. A tremor moved through the room. Not gasps or cheers, just the tension breaking, like a window finally cracked after years of pressure. Silene stood, slowly, clutching the edges of her printed memo like it could still shield her. She opened her mouth, maybe to deny, maybe to accuse, but no sound came out. She walked out before anyone said a word. No one followed her. After the door closed, Ronan stood. "I'll coordinate the audit requests," he said, "and I'll be stepping down after the review." "Why?" one of the board members asked, the older man with the stiff collar who'd stayed silent through most of the session. Ronan glanced at me, then back at the room. Because someone who let this happen shouldn't be the one to fix it. No one argued. The meeting adjourned minutes later. No ceremony. Just a slow gathering of folders and shifting of chairs, everyone suddenly unsure how to stand after the ground had moved. Outside, the sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the front walkway. I waited under the awning, watching as residents trickled out, one by one. Some nodded toward me, some said nothing, but a few stopped. Mr. Lenz shook my hand. Mrs. Givens whispered, "I'm sorry it took this." Even the Morenos gave a quiet nod, their teenage son trailing behind, glancing once at Alora's tattoo as if seeing it for the first time, and not flinching. I didn't see Silene again, but I saw what she left behind. That night, an email landed in every resident's inbox. It was short, just 2 paragraphs. Due to procedural inconsistencies and violations of community charter, the emergency bench removal order has been voided. The Marlow Glen HOA Board is initiating a full review of all enforcement actions taken over the past year. Residents affected will be contacted for input and correction. There was no signature. I didn't need one. I printed the email, folded it in half, slipped it under the brass plaque on the bench. Elora joined me a few minutes later, standing barefoot in the grass, hoodie off, arms crossed like she was ready to fight the wind if it came too strong. "They backed off," she said. "They didn't have a choice." She ran her fingers across the engraved letters, brushing a flake of peeled sticker from the edge. "I thought winning would feel louder." "It's not about loud," I said. "It's about lasting." We sat on the bench together, just like she and Michaela had done so many times. The wood creaked slightly but held firm, weathered and solid. The plaque gleamed under the porch light, polished by the community now, not attacked by it. "I'm not taking it off," Elora said, tracing the numbers inked into her skin. "No one's asking you to." They tried. And they lost. We stayed there for a long while, saying nothing more. The silence wasn't heavy now. It was full, like a room that had finally exhaled. From across the street, a young girl rode her bike past, slowing down just enough to look our way. She stared at the plaque, then at Elora's tattoo, then kept going. No fear in her eyes, just curiosity. That was enough. Behind us, the clubhouse lights flickered off. The meeting was over. The illusion was gone. But the bench remained. 2 weeks passed. Not one more violation notice arrived. The bench stood untouched, the sticker finally peeled off by a maintenance worker who didn't make eye contact when he did it. The welcome sign spotlight had been relit, and beneath it, Michaela's carving gleamed again. Her fight is written in her blood. Ronan kept his word. He submitted his resignation quietly, attached to a public statement archived in the HOA's official meeting log. It was clean, professional, and devastating. I regret not acting sooner. I witnessed procedural manipulations, unauthorized edits, and targeted enforcement, and I remained silent out of fear. This community deserves better than silence. No one argued. No one defended Silene. Her resignation came just days later. No press release, no explanation, just a line in the bulletin. Board President Silene Vreich has stepped down. Interim leadership will be selected during the next open session. But the community didn't need leadership right away. It needed memory. Elora and I hosted a small gathering the following Saturday. Not formal, not organized. Just a few neighbors, some lemonade, and folding chairs near the bench. A few parents brought their kids. One woman brought a candle, another brought a photo of her late husband, who died of lymphoma 2 years prior. She'd never told anyone. "I always wanted to put something here for him," she said quietly, "but I was told it wouldn't be aesthetically consistent." Elora just nodded and made space beside the plaque. "Add it." So she did. A tiny metal charm with her husband's initials, zip-tied gently to the bench's side panel. Others followed, small tokens. Nothing loud, nothing flashy, just stories finally allowed to exist. That night, Elora came to me holding a folded piece of paper. "I want to speak at the next meeting," she said. "You sure?" She nodded. "They tried to make me feel like I was a problem. I wanted on record that I'm not." The next board meeting wasn't packed, but it was quiet, listening quiet, the kind that only comes when everyone knows something has changed and isn't ready to pretend otherwise. Elora stood at the front, tattoo visible, shoulders back, no scarf. "My name is Elora Truel," she said, "and I survived leukemia when I was 12. I got this tattoo to remind myself I lived. I didn't think it would offend anyone. I didn't think it needed to be hidden. But I was wrong, because someone decided that survival wasn't a good look." She paused, looking around the room. "But I'm not asking permission to exist anymore. I'm not asking this board to validate what I've been through. I just want to make sure no one else has to shrink so someone else can feel powerful. That's all." She stepped down before anyone could clap. She didn't want applause, just the words on the record. We walked home in silence, but the air was different, lighter, like the shadows had shifted just enough to let something real through. When we got to the porch, she looked up at me. "Think it'll stay this way?" "Long enough for the next fight," I said. She smiled. "Then we leave it better than we found it." The next morning, I found a new plaque mounted beside Michaela's on the bench. I didn't put it there, neither did Elora. It simply read, "No more silence." And in the corner, etched small, was a number, 126D. If you've ever watched someone rewrite your story to make themselves feel bigger, if you've ever been punished for surviving in public, this story is for you. Subscribe and don't miss the next one. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?